Yesterday, in various homes and churches and buildings around the world, perhaps more so away from our country than within it, people took a piece of chalk. Oftentimes it was taken by a priest or a pastor. By others, the chalk had been blessed the previous week. And they climbed a ladder, or they stood in a chair, or somehow they reached up, and over the top of their door they wrote 20 plus C plus M plus B plus 18. Glad it was not any longer. I would have been in the congregation. In honor and in recognition of the feast of the Epiphany, people wrote this above their doors as an Epiphany blessing. Now, the 2018 mean the year. And each of the pluses stand for a cross, which represent Jesus. And then each letter represents the traditional name assigned to one of the magi who came to see Jesus. C for Caspar, M for Melchior, and B for Balthazar. We don't know their names, okay? All we know from Matthew is that there were wise men. He doesn't even say three. His book is the only one that even has the story. But it's become an important observance for us in the tradition of the church. Epiphany, the Feast of the Epiphany. It officially ends Christmas. All of this can come down now. You can go home and take down those decorations that you haven't taken down. Because you let them stay until Epiphany, didn't you? Some of you did. Just remember, you better watch out. Because somebody's watching. But it signifies the end of the Christmas season. And it's this wonderful, wonderful event. Some people get together and they burn their Christmas trees. Other people do other kinds of things in observance of the Epiphany. And it was yesterday. A wonderful, wonderful day, a wonderful, wonderful event. We are quite fond of events in our lives, aren't we? We observe events when we observe birthdays or anniversaries or special days. In the church, those events become holidays and holy days. And we observe them each year as we gather together as people of God in observance of these kinds of occasions. And I love it. I love a good party. I love a good time together. I love to lift these things up. But sometimes I think as we do that and as we make them such special events, there's something that gets lost. For you see, we get so caught up in what we do. We get so caught up in the chalk above the door. We get so caught up in the burning of the trees. We get so caught up in the various events that we forget that it was quite a trip to get there. Matthew tells us that it was wise men who came. He doesn't say how many. We traditionally observe 3, but in some traditions they say as many as 12. That would make for a lot of writing above the door. And they are summoned to follow a star. Not a GPS. That's an ancient GPS. And that's how, for centuries, people have journeyed across the desert or across the ocean. Is by triangulating stars, always going in a certain direction. That's how to know where you're going. So they start out on this journey following a star. But you know, I don't know about you, but even with a GPS, sometimes when I'm on a trip and I'm going where I've never been before, at some point as I'm going along on that trip, I really begin to wonder if I'm headed in the right direction. It used to happen a lot more with maps. But I get lost sometimes, at least in my mind, wondering how to get somewhere. And so they wound up going to talk to Herod. Do you get the irony? That they were going to see the King of the Jews, and they stopped to ask directions from the King of the Jews? That's important. That's important. And while there, they find out how they need to go and where they go, and they go to where Jesus and Mary are. What a journey that must have been. What amount of time did they spend at rest areas and restaurants on their way? How in the world could they hold true to following the star? It's not unlike what you and I do in our lives, is it? It's not unlike what you and I do when we try to live a life of faith. We set out oftentimes with some kind of hunger within ourselves that needs to be filled, and it needs to be filled by something that we found nothing would do. And in that yearning, in that star-drawn time, we set out on a journey to look for what will fill that part of us. And hopefully we wind up at an event at some time. You know what we call those events? Epiphanies. Hopefully we have an epiphany at some point where, just like the wise men, we have our come to Jesus moment. And we are filled. We're touched. And something happens within us. But you know, it doesn't end there. Their journey or our journey. I've got to tell you, if I were Mary, now I've already had all these shepherds and all these other folks show up, now I'm home. And I'm trying to deal with this baby who is driving me bonkers. Because that's the reason for being for babies. It took you a minute. But if I'm Mary and I'm trying to cope with being a new mother, and 3 strange men or 12 strange men show up in my house and they kneel down and they give me gold, frankincense, and myrrh, I'm not going to take it lightly. I'm going to look at them and say, who are you? And why are you here? And what do you want from me? And I somehow think that, at least in my mind, that's what happened when they went in that place with Jesus, when they had their epiphany. I think it was probably less an epiphany for Mary than it was for them. But it didn't stop there, did it? Because what happened? What happened when they left? They kept following the star. What our walk of faith, that's what our journey with Christ is like. We set out looking and moving toward the star, but just like the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, we never get to the star. But along the way, we have our epiphanies. And our epiphanies keep revealing to us God's presence in our lives. This is kind of an aside, but last night after the service, in talking about this journey, someone came up to me and said, "You know what the real miracle of the Epiphany is?" And I said, "What?" And they said that 3 men stopped and asked for directions. I thought it was a miracle that it wasn't a woman who gave them to him. We follow our star. We look in that direction, and we know forever that that is where we go. And we don't know all of the details. We look to each other for directions. We look to each other for support. And together we walk toward the star. Because we know that somehow there we encounter God. But along the way we have our epiphanies. We have our times in the home with Mary and Jesus where we know somehow we are on the way, and we learn also that even as we walk together, Jesus walks with us. And if we follow the star, we walk with him. So it's a lovely event, a great and wonderful thing. But this year, this Epiphany, my Epiphany, is that it's about the trip, a road trip to experience God. And for me, that's my Epiphany of 2001.